Hey, everybody, welcome back. That was a false start before we came on the air, but now we're actually live with you. I'm joined today by my good friend John Avlon, who is one of the smartest guys I know under this sun, and I appreciate his wisdom every time we talk, which has been now for damn near 25 years. So, John, I want to start out with a part of the conversation that you and I are both painfully experienced in, and that is third-party questions. And everybody's talking this week about Elon Musk and the America Party and what's it going to mean and how's it going to happen. And before we came on the air, we were talking about, like, he's kind of in a weird box. Americans really want another idea, but do they want Elon Musk's idea for a third party?
Right. And this is sort of a box of his own creation. You know, I'm reminded of a quote I read recently, which is, "We all live in cages with the door open." And but this is a cage sort of his own creation, right?
Sure.
I mean, Musk, like a lot of folks in Silicon Valley, are sort of, libertarian inclined, centrist, pro-business types who convinced themselves that the Democratic Party had moved so far left that they had no choice but to back Donald Trump to defend democracy, civilization, right, Constitution, which is, as absurd on the face as it was at the time.
Right.
But now many of them have belatedly realized that they have sort of empowered a madman who doesn't give a damn about the Constitution, doesn't give a damn about our democracy. Right. And so they're looking for an off-ramp. I mean, in the case of Elon, maybe it's because, gutting our clean energy provisions not only is against his interests, but American competitiveness. And that was one of the arguments folks were using. And
sure,
this third-party dream has been around, since at least Teddy Roosevelt. The Republican Party in its original moderate progressive incarnation was a third party under Abraham Lincoln. But this is and he's got the dollars to do anything. A fulcrum strategy, which is electing a small number of senators or members of the House, that is a non-crazy strategy. But the problem is he's attached himself to Trump, and now it's very unclear that the off-ramp he is proposing would work, particularly in federal races. So he's tapping into something real, but he's a complex messenger. He said
complex that's putting it very mildly, John.
You're welcome. Yeah. No, but remember when he bought Twitter, I did a thing on CNN. He was saying, well, I'm the centrist. We really want to, and this is the problem. Once you start playing mythic moral equivalence in this particular time in our politics, it's a sucker's bet. And Gollum always turns on its creator. And I don't know how many damn times people need to figure this out, but apparently it's endless in the cycles of human history.
I do think, we've talked about this 1,000 times. There are a lot of people out there in that weird box that fiscally conservative, socially moderate, they want to see progress in America, but they don't want to see, they're not radical transformation types of any description. I think the problem is, even if Elon was in a pre-Trump posture, some of the stuff that we've seen Elon express in the last couple of years, the racially motivated stuff, the weird, diving into the conspiracy pool, I don't think that works as well. There's a perfect example. When he said the other day, I think that lacked empathy. Oh, did it?
I mean, this is also a guy who said that, that empathy was Western civilization's Achilles heel.
Right.
And we should riff a little bit about the new sort of Western civilization defense, or the revived Western civilization,
right,
of these cats. But I mean, this is the problem. You never go full crazy when you start thinking about yourself as a meme, and bad things will happen. Look, we should say, or you might not want to say this, but I will. Elon Musk is an enormously successful, ambitious entrepreneur.
No, I'll say that freely. Absolutely.
And before he decided to get on the Trump train, this is a guy who'd made big bets that were transformational to the economy. He'd enriched himself as a result. By the way, some of these things were a result of government contracts, before we sort of unpack the whole, totally self-made man entrepreneur theory of greatness. But he has hurt his brand, and now
I think that
looking up to it belatedly. But the damage is real, and everyone's got a chance at redemption. But this is an odd project. It will scratch an itch that some people want scratched. I get it.
Sure.
Folks who feel alienated by the far right and the far left. But to pretend that the Republican Party is the corrective for the far left under Donald Trump's, autocratic auspices is absurd and always has been.
I mean, having been around the block a few times now, we have, without exaggeration, never had a more statist American president in my lifetime, including when I was a kid. Lyndon Johnson was not this statist. Lyndon Johnson was still like, hey, let the market handle some of these things. But Trump has a. I think you're right. If the corrective to liberal excess, call it what you will, was Donald Trump, that you're asking the wrong set of questions. And if the corrective to Donald Trump is Elon Musk, I'm fascinated by how this is going to play out, because for all Trump's cognitive deficits, for all his shallow, understanding of the world, he has a kind of feral sense of what endangers him. And I think if he sees Musk out there with this America Party idea, which I want to say one thing about why Musk is doing it properly, but if he sees Musk out there with this and entering into Senate races, entering into House primaries, entering into House races against his candidates in the general, I think he's going to have I think he's going to go to war with Elon. I mean, I don't think the deportation thing's a threat anymore. I think it's a damn near a certitude if it looks to Trump as if this could take the majorities.
Well, I remember a comment he made. He said, I was always surprised Biden didn't cancel his government contracts.
Right.
And that's because, you don't allow partisan politics to override policy or, contracts, or unless, of course, you're Donald Trump and believe that l'état c'est moi. And as he said many times, I mean, basically, the only thing that matters is his good graces. It's the mob boss theory of the presidency, which is one in a long line of reasons why this project is the opposite of anything resembling a revival of American exceptionalism. Okay, but let's talk about that off ramp. Now, first of all, let's preface it with this, right? Not that long ago, when a clownish cavalcade of totally unqualified cabinet nominees were being put forward, and Republicans knuckled under.
Sure.
The threat that members of Congress, and the Senate in this case, senators were hearing is, if you vote against any of his nominees, no matter how unqualified, no matter how much this dooms
Elon's going to nuke you.
Right. You will be primaried, and Elon Musk is going to pay for it. And that scared the bejesus out of people in the Senate.
Sure.
And now all of a sudden, shoes on the other foot, and he's saying, what? Maybe I'll do the Fulcrum strategy. Now, I kind of wish this incarnation of threat had been around during Trump 1, when you had, people like, Crocker, from Senator from Tennessee, and the former senator from Arizona, who wrote the update to the Constitution Conservative, who was the ambassador to Turkey, Jeff Flake. You had a number of senators and member of Congress who were true constitutional conservatives. They were not Trumpists. They were not populists. And one by one, they knuckled under because they felt they couldn't lose a closed partisan primary in a red state. They would lose a closed partisan primary in a red state if Donald Trump went after them. Now, if any of them had the stones to say, what, I'm going to do what Lisa Murkowski did. I'm not going to knuckle under. I'm going to run as an independent in the general election. Any one of them might have won. Right. And that would have itself sent a sense that, the Congress doesn't need to, chemically castrate itself in the face of Donald Trump's threats, which is what they've done. You could stand up, have stone, have spine, and actually do what you think is right, and you just might be rewarded. Particularly, but none of them did that, in part because there hasn't been the structure and the apparatus to support people who are trying to be in the center and vote their conscience and their constituencies. Right. So the Republican Party becomes a wholly owned subsidiary of Trump Inc., and everyone's scared because fear and greed apparently works on these cowards. But that actually would have been a healthy thing for any number of them to do. And again, Lisa Murkowski did this during the Tea Party. She won a write-in race with the name Murkowski, which is well known in Alaska, but not terribly easy to spell. And so any of them could have done this, and maybe that would help break the fever that is killing our country right now. And it's got to break one way or the other.
And unfortunately for what's left in the Republican Party, that pool got even more shallow. I mean, Tom Tillis, said, I'm out. And Don Bacon, I'm out. And, a couple of others are going to drift away before this is over. And they will not be replaced by people like them. They will be replaced by crazy people. And I think that there's one weird thing that Musk is doing right here. He is starting at the congressional level, and if he was really, really, really a long game player, he'd start dumping money into some state legislative races where $100,000 is like a nuclear bomb going off.
Or mayor's races, right?
Sure.
The big mistake that third party dreams make is they start, I think, inspired by Ross Perot, who has been a reassessment of his 92 candidacy. And that's when the number of registered independent voters started spiking, is after 92. Yep. They start with the presidency. It's the dumbest thing you can do. And it's got to be case by case. I think we need a strong center left in the Democratic Party to be sort of the reform party, particularly in blue states.
Absolutely.
And not a defender of the status quo. And there may be places, though, in a deep red state where a Democrat doesn't have a prayer, creating an off-ramp where there's an alternative party that can create a coalition. That could be really interesting. We tried it. They tried it in the Nebraska Senate race.
In Nebraska, right? And look, I think Osborne. I think that race, there was, it's like a chemistry experiment where you throw all the things in the pot. It was about to catalyze. I don't think they ever quite got there, obviously, but there was something to that, and there were people. There were even some disgruntled Republicans were like, not bad. I could do this. This isn't the worst possible idea. I think though that he lacked the financial resources to really make it happen.
Yeah, we have an alternative architecture, and so this offers the promise of the dollars to do it. But the problem is it's a little damn late, right? I mean, you already empowered Donald Trump to retake the White House. And let's nerd out for a second. I was reading some history. I'm doing a book on Teddy Roosevelt's Man in the Arena speech now, and it's about citizenship and a democracy. And he draws on history. And there was an ancient Athenian leader named Solon who got brought in when Athens was splintering apart, right? Because
welcome to the Classics Hour with John Avlon and Rick Wilson.
Polarization, what we would call hyperpartisan polarization. Okay, and they basically have a reset, new constitution, amnesty for everybody except people who tried to overthrow the government. So one group, they were like, nah, you don't get that. And folks like Musk just enabled us to make that historic sin, right? We reelected somebody who tried to overthrow our democracy. So it's damn late. Perhaps it's never too late to try to make amends, because you already empowered the worst thing. And this is what kills me about Tillis. Tillis said, you know what? Screw it. I'm going to be with my family. I don't need to live under this kind of threat. Now, he could have said, I'm going to run as an independent. Fine. I'd rather have the Democrats take the Senate. So by all means, let's have Roy Cooper run for the Senate. But that's after he voted for Pete Hegseth. That's after he voted for Kash Patel. That's after he voted
Tulsi Gabbard, right?
And Tulsi Gabbard. Like, so if you were going to say, you know what, I'm going to go be principled. I'm going to take a stand. I'm going to take the off ramp because I'm up next, and I know that threat is real under the Trump presidency. Like, you could have done a lot more good if you were going to be consistently courageous. And instead, he empowered half the agenda out of the gate.
One of the questions I have is there is an enormous amount of enthusiasm right now for Zohran Mamdani in New York among Democrats across the country. And I wonder, and I don't wonder, I saw it happening immediately. The Republicans tried to turn him into the next, catalog of imaginary demons that they have. Oh, he's a communist. He's this, he's that. I wonder if there's a slice of the Democratic electorate that could be drawn into this America Party idea as well. Not a big one, but I'm curious if there is some area, because I know a lot of blue dog Democrat types, Southern Democrat types who have absolutely no home. And I don't have a lot of statistics on it. Trump did okay with them in 2016. And they drifted away after that. I don't think they came back, but I'm wondering if this party has a risk factor for Democrats. And by the way, when I say a risk factor, Democrats, it's on y'all. I'm not saying that because it's some magical thing. It's because Democrats do a lot of things that are not where the country is. Right. But, so let's break that down.
first of all, I have believed, and my first book was a history of centrist leaders in American politics called Independent Nation. That the center right and the center left share much more than they have in common, usually with the extremes of their own party.
Yep.
This is before Donald Trump, effectively, destroyed anything resembling the same center right. I mean, by trashing people like John McCain and on and on. The center left is still much more strong and viable, and basically, in charge of the major decisions of the Democratic Party, whereas the center right doesn't exist.
Right.
As a functional governing force, people like Don Bacon heading for the exits, which is bad for the country, maybe good for the Democratic Party, creating a balance to this insanity. The thing is, like, even in New York, the number of self-described, this is how they ask the question, very liberal people in the Democratic Party is 13%. I'll check that out. There you go.
There you go.
From the past. I love it. It's 13%. So you have a closed partisan Democratic primary, 13%. If you have a very talented campaigner and communicator like Mondami,
which he was,
you got to give that to him. And Andrew Cuomo, who was enormously experienced. Mondami has virtually no experience, not leading anything or working in the private sector, but a lot of baggage. And ranked choice voting in a closed partisan primary, all that meant that Mondami could, registering like 30,000 new voters, extraordinary accomplishment. In that ecosystem, you can get someone like Mondami elected. He is we should say, a self-described democratic socialist, right? The Republicans have been calling everyone from Bill Clinton to Obama socialist or communist. Here you have someone who is a self-described democratic socialist. The other problem is this is an executive position, as you and I well know.
Yes.
Right? It's not AOC being a talented communicator in Congress advocating a point of view. This is day-to-day management leadership responsibilities.
Yep.
And in Chicago, the Brandon Johnson version of this experiment has not gone terribly well.
No.
Right.
Exactly. And, I wrote a piece right after he was elected. And I was thinking about stuff that you and I went through, in the late 90s there. And folks, being mayor of New York, 99% of what you do is there's a water main break. There's a building collapse. A cop got hurt. A firefighter got hurt. There's a gas leak somewhere. There's a pothole somewhere. A road is caved in somewhere. And you're in the Suburban racing around the city all day, all night long, dealing with the mechanical things that New York, a marvelous, marvelous city, but marvelously complex and painfully broken in places. And you got to deal with it every day.
Mm-hmm. And that's why mayors are at their best non-ideological problem solvers.
Correct.
And if you have someone who's predominantly ideological, without a lot of, executive experience, that's a problem. And you can see what's happening. I mean, Trump clearly, he may have been able to, strike a corrupt bargain with Eric Adams, but let's be clear, he wants Mondami to win, right? Because
yes, Fox will dine out on this guy forever.
In the same way that I remember one of my favorites ads, AOC had a higher name ID among Republicans than Democrats.
Right.
Because Fox had fetishized her and built her up so much. Now, I'd say that one thing Mondami did right, and this is something that the center needs to take a note on, is two A's: authenticity and affordability.
Absolutely.
And the affordability crisis, I think the middle class squeeze is the thing that has driven such anger and disaffection in our politics.
Yep.
Until we fix it, until we rebuild the middle class, that's going to continue to exist. And there is a role for government in creating the market conditions to do that. Right.
Which ironically, as hard as I fought against Obamacare, it actually started to create market conditions. It actually, since its DNA, its early DNA was a Heritage Foundation proposal, it actually ended up creating market conditions. And it is, I think you're right though. I mean, this seething unrest in the middle class out there is not unjustified. It's not illegitimate. It's real. And I wish more of them understood that feeling that they've been screwed. There's someone who did the screwing, and it's not the Communist Party USA, and it's not going to be, and Mondami as mayor of New York is not going to have a deputy mayor for seizing the means of production or anything like that. Right.
But at the same time, be careful, because I hear this happening a lot. about people saying, well, Mondami can't actually do the things he's talking about. And this is another one of those lessons of history. When someone tells you who they are, believe them. Right. I mean, yes, he may not be able to unilaterally do some of the things he says, but again, it's you want non-ideological problem solvers in government. You want people who can create big coalitions. He's a very effective communicator. And he says he wants to unify the city, but it's very difficult to unify the city if you refuse to condemn, like the phrase, globalize the intifada. Right. Like you can say, oh, it's a free speech issue, but no, it's not really, that. And so here's where I think the far left, the caricatures of the far left, stick in the craw of a lot of folks, particularly in the middle class, who are frustrated and aggrieved and squeezed. And that's what empowers the Donald Trumps of the world. You go look at what happened, almost 100 years ago. The bogeyman of radical change causes a lot of people to end up empowering the far right, and the results are disastrous at the end of the day for everybody.
Well, and I think Donald Trump has been this glue that held together a coalition that was starting to fragment, because that middle class anxiety was starting to break against the established GOP back in the Tea Party moment, where that brief 6-week period where the Tea Party was real before we bought it, before the Kochs went and bought it. And folks, that's a longer story for another day. But that Trump has glued that party together with the culture war stuff, which is, emotionally effective and politically poisonous. But I do wonder, does the two-party system survive the post-Trump era? Do we end up with a progressive party that is meaningfully on the left of the left? Do we end up with a center-right party, a center-left party, a Republican party that is the populist MAGA, iteration of it now? I know it's a parlor game, but I'm fascinated by that parlor game, and I always have been, because there is a stress fracture in both parties.
There absolutely is. And let's just nerd out and give the context to this. Okay, first of all, the Constitution doesn't mention political parties.
Nope.
Doesn't mention journalists, doesn't mention political parties. Not an oversight. George Washington,
correct,
Senate president, as a matter of principle. In Washington's farewell address, which I wrote a book about, he warns against the forces that have destroyed democracies in the past. And the number one thing is what we would call
faction,
hyperpartisanship. So the two parties are created in embryo, in his first term, to his great dismay and displeasure, really falling along fault lines about debates around the French Revolution, right? Which is why it's totally ironic that you have the allegedly conservative party defending people attacking the Capitol. But okay, fine. Fine. So, but if you take another step back, so structurally, there's nothing that says there's any magic to this, to the current partisan structure. And the other thing is, I think human beings, at least Americans, it's the only thing I can speak for all human experience. But I think it's much more organic to say that people are temperamentally and politically. It's a mistake to divide them into two groups. The choices are not conservative or liberal. There is a folks who are radicals, reactionaries, and then I'd say they're reformers. They're people in the middle who understand that evolution is much better than revolution, and they're moderate in temperament. They want to focus on what unites us, not what divides us. And no party really feels that a lot of them feel alienated by the two parties. Now, I think sometimes that's overstated. If you look at the policies of the actual Democratic Party, not the caricatures of the far left that are used to sort of frustrate folks and have had are cultural irritants in many respects and have unintended consequences, like the things the guys, the abundance folks are trying to deal with, which are absolutely real. Because you got to get back building again to grow the middle class. Like that's the moderate majority, and we've had our power basically diluted by this artificial division. And the reason the number of independents are growing so much in the last 20, 30 years is because the parties have become more polarized. So I think what you do need is more authentic people, leaders in the vital center who are authentic and passionate and can not sort of, speak for the mushy middle from a poll-driven script, because that's bullshit and people can sense it.
It doesn't work anymore. You mentioned the abundance movement, and there have been some folks that have been thinking about this for longer than Ezra and his folks and Derek, who, by the way, I think both of them are very, very smart guys. Peter Diamandis and other people have been writing about this for 20 years. And it somewhat springs out of a Silicon Valley, idea of getting out of the way of people wanting to create and build and grow. I don't know how abundance, and I'm curious about your thoughts on this, how abundance works politically, given that there are profound incentives inside of Wall Street and the Valley and everywhere else, where the product isn't the product is the stock price of the company. And I wonder how that works as we go forward, if the abundance movement has weighed that, and what you think about it.
So that's a fascinating second order question, but you're right. What we're suffering from in America right now is a series of screwed up incentive structures, right? So members of Congress are just afraid of losing closed partisan primaries because they've got a rigged system of redistricting that means 90% of seats are effectively safe, right? So what does that do? It means they're not reaching out trying to solve problems across the aisle because they're really just trying to make sure their own base stays in line. And that leads to sort of apocalyptic politics. Yeah. In the economy, what you just described is a very real problem, right? Which is the compensation structures are based on the stock price. That's based on a perception of future value or something like near monopoly. And so, right. This is the proper role of government. I am a deep believer that liberal capitalist democracy is a force for good in the world. What that also means is, though, that you're creating guardrails to save sort of, liberal capitalist democracy from itself. So right. You, for example, said, we're going to have, incredibly low capital gains taxes on investment, not stock flipping, right? We're going to try to move from a quarterly earnings report, which, by the way, can be gamed and often is, to a larger, portfolio of value creation in the Warren Buffett, Charlie Munger mold. That would be healthy. I think what the value of the abundance conversation is having, and you're right to say it predates Derek Thompson and Ezra Klein, is that there have been a series of unintended consequences related to the over-lawyering and over-bureaucratizing of processes.
Oh, God, yes.
We can't build. And so Democrats, they try to do something and they can't get anything done. And that adds to frustration in the sense that government doesn't work, that democracy can't deliver. That plays right into the hands of the autocrats and the absolutists. So I do think, and I just gave a speech the other day to the New York Economic Club about this, this is why I think, the center left needs to be the reform party, right, particularly in blue states. And you need to sort of take bold swings based on building again. In New York, I think it's high-speed rail and nuclear power, something that Kathy Hochul is embracing.
Kathy Hochul coming out for nuclear power and high-speed rail and saying we're going to cut through the barriers to get these things done for our people. I've not been a Kathy Hochul fan traditionally, but I was like, if she gets it in a state where there are a lot of very entrenched interests against those things, that means something.
It does. By the way, she came out strong in favor of nuclear, high-speed rail. I think New York's a state where it can actually get done. We're seeing Brightline get it done in places and states where it's been paralyzed. But
Brightline is in Florida has been a huge success story, a state that does not traditionally enjoy public transportation.
Right, exactly. And this just goes to show, if you can, this is where a lot of folks on the far left sometimes, or, I think they're not harnessing market forces. They're trying to, put their thumb on the scale of market forces. That doesn't work, right? But if you take big swings, and if you say we're going to look at the way Josh Shapiro got, the 95 fixed in 3 days, it's because he actually said, we're going to focus on getting it done. You couldn't build the Empire State Building in 1 year anymore. It'd be a year to get through the initial, filing processes.
Oh God, yeah.
So we got to recognize that these are sclerotic traps of our own making, and we got to break through them. This is where an agenda of simplification might actually help realign some of the folks on the center libertarian side who don't want us to be, alienating our allies and engaging in trade wars and tariff battles. That I'm still stunned that so many folks on the right just did an immediate flip on free trade after 40 years of catechism.
I have, I grew up in that entire culture, and free trade was one of the holy sacraments of the limited government conservative mold. It was absolutely mind-boggling to me to watch many people who I have sat in rooms with railing against protectionism suddenly no, this is great. The president's going to make 90 deals in 90 days. It's beautiful. It's all going to work perfectly. Anyway, well, John, I appreciate you as always, brother. We are up on our time.
All right.
And folks, thank you for joining us today. This is a conversation that John and I have been having, like I said, for a very long time now. And I'll see you soon, brother.
All right, brother. You be well.